Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of The Business of YouTube. Today we have a new guest, which is not just an operator like we saw in the past episodes. He's an advisor and investor, and he has been in tech and in the investment sector and advising as well, M&A and everything growth in terms of sport. So I thought it was very interesting to have a slightly different point of view compared to the other episodes. So welcome to the stage of the Business of YouTube podcast, Michael Broughton. Hello.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here because as we were chatting before, like we have 500 people in common on LinkedIn and we never met in person, although like we're part of the same history one way or another in terms of platforms, tech, entertainment as a whole. So very nice to talk to you.
Delighted that we have finally crossed paths and you've invited me on. So looking forward
and
to the
on
conversation.
YouTube.
On YouTube, well, where else would you want to do it?
Whereas, and actually, just to start the conversation, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I saw that your podcast went live on YouTube very quickly.
Very quickly after a certain person told me that I needed to go onto YouTube. So, I cheated. I went onto ChatGPT and asked it, how do I start distributing a podcast I'm creating for Spotify on YouTube? And boom, it gave me instructions, and within an hour, I was up and running.
Wow, I call it make it work rather than cheating. So as far as it works, then it was up and running, and that's how innovators are. They just make it happen. So I was actually appreciating that. I was like, okay, straight to the point, make it happen. So and also I think that timing wise it's very interesting to have you here in the podcast today because I saw your post on LinkedIn where you were asking why is the algorithm showing you all of the YouTube or Roblox like is actually all the numbers are crazy and everything should be taking that into consideration in their business model in a way or another. And I found it very timely. So what did you answer yourself when to that question of that post, or what is your impression of the answers that you got from there?
Yeah, I think I have found it very confusing that people are confused at the success of YouTube. That to me, it just hasn't made any sense in my head. And I'm sure it's partly the algorithm that, I follow people like yourself, Joe Redfern, and others who are big proponents about the positives of the business of YouTube. So maybe it's just bouncing off the walls and it just keeps coming at me because I've liked and responded to those posts. But everywhere I look, I think everyone's trying to grapple with where is YouTube going and will it eat sport? What does that mean for sport? And obviously that's my industry. My confusion comes from, and I pulled it up ahead of this conversation. In 2013, I led a significant investment into a business, and I brought up my investment case thesis that went to the Investco committee. And I mean, I'm going to repeat some of the statistics. So these sound really small now, but it's 2013, and it was 60 hours of video uploaded every minute, or 1 hour of video is uploaded to YouTube every second. Over 4 billion views, videos are viewed a day. 800 million unique users on YouTube each month. 3 billion hours of video watched each month on YouTube. So, and I think in 2011, YouTube had already more than 1 trillion views, which meant that this is 2011, 140 views per person on the planet. And I was just sat there in 2013 going, well, there's only one direction of travel for this, right? It's only going to get bigger and faster and better. And that was 2013, and I thought that the numbers were big then. Obviously, the numbers now are insanely larger than they are then.
Exactly. Hard to even pronounce yet the numbers right now.
I mean, I think we're going to have to create new words for numbers and sums. But I go back to that investment thesis multiple times because we executed terribly on the business, but the theory was right. which was not just YouTube, but our theory was video is going to take over. And you got to remember that was prior to Facebook was not yet doing video. All right, so it was still
Yeah,
just posts
Facebook
and
came
pictures.
way later. Yes.
And what we were designing was a technology where the founder had come up with this great idea, which is upload once, distribute everywhere for video. And it was brilliant. It was absolute genius. It was 2-3 years too early, which was our mistake. I think if we'd stuck it out, the business would probably be absolutely killing it today, because it would allow me, at the moment, I'm downloading a video I create and then individually uploading it into multiple locations. This would have allowed me to do it once, and it would have distributed automatically for me across where I wanted, and I could set the rules and regs and payment and subscriptions and whatever. So it was genius in 2013, 14. Business failed miserably, but it was genius. It was a great idea. But again, I go back to one of the things that feeds most video animals on the planet is sport. So as a guy looking at it in 2013 going, well, sport is one of the core forms of content. YouTube is clearly going to be the winner or one of the big winners in video. We've got to be in the space.
But then I was actually linked to the numbers from Nielsen that I was reading, like sports, especially this year, because of the Olympics and because of the NFL Sunday ticket from that is on YouTube. It was really driving the usage up like big time, and it's just going to go that way, like that direction. Now that YouTube as well is more serious about sports, is actually embracing it in one way or another, probably trying to figure it out still, but it has never taken a like kind of a proactive approach like with the NFL is doing as we speak.
Yeah, I mean the Sunday ticket, I think, was a pretty transformational moment. Seeing an organization like YouTube spend serious money, and the back end tech to deliver live games of that volume to that many households at the same time. And then they did it, not just that, but we'll do quad view, so you can select 4 different games at the same time that you can view. That's some pretty cool stuff. And look, the NFL is king in sports in the States, and so I think that was an amazing thing. I think the bit that I'm intrigued by, and I haven't dug into this, is how much of it is live sport, how much of it is archive, how much of it is professional, and how much of it is actually, Joe Blogs in the back garden doing a highlight reel, replicating something that they've seen, or just a bit of fun, right? So I think my definition of sport probably goes broader than most people's definition of sport. And I think what it shows is also that there is still an obsession with sport in different formats. So I clapped back at somebody earlier this week. I keep seeing people at conferences, and I'm sure you've seen the same people, stand on stage and say, no one watches sport anymore. I'm like, no. They're consuming more of it than we ever have before.
Never been so much request of content as now.
Right. The difference is they're in different places, different lengths of span, different ways of consuming. Yes, it's more mobile. As we're seeing now, it's actually more YouTube on TVs rather than not just on mobiles and devices. So I don't think there's ever been so much of a consumption of sport. It's just different. And YouTube is weirdly, by going into Sunday Ticket, now kind of straddling that weird world of, is it evergreen content that sits on a YouTube, or is it live broadcast? And actually, I'm really enthused for sport, because when a YouTube goes, hey, we could really accelerate if we take live.
Do you think it's going to happen, like going more live, or it's more of an exception?
I'd love to understand how the economics are playing out for them. I would argue over time, I think they'll do more. I'm not sure that it's important at the same time not to think of outliers as the norm. So NFL Sunday Ticket is an outlier. There aren't many things like that. Um, could you see them doing something like that for somebody else? Yes. I'm not sure anybody else really has the same kind of. Weirdly, if you take the Premier League, they now have so many games spread across so many different time sets that how would you do that, right? Whereas the NFL, you've got 6 hours of TV nonstop, right? It just doesn't stop for 6 hours, and you're going to get 9, 10, 11 games. That 3 o'clock window in England, there's like 5 games now. Like you're never sure how many games there are. But I think if you were to get rid of, if I was sat at the Premier League, I would absolutely love to see someone like a YouTube take the 3 o'clock window and say, we will do 5 or 6 games at the same time. You could do a quad box or something like that, and just bring it to a whole new audience. Do I think that's likely? No. I'd love to see
Hard to
it.
believe, but you never know. You weren't expecting NFL on YouTube either eventually, so.
No, I was not.
But
I
I
was
think
not.
it's hard.
I think it's hard. I'm not sure what the money is, but one of the other things I think you should always think about with sport is because of the audience that sport, and particularly live sport, attracts, it doesn't necessarily need to be profitable for the broadcaster, whatever nature that broadcaster is. And that can be a YouTube, that can be a streamer, it can be all sorts of things, right? I always thought one of the most interesting things was that Monday Night Football in America was one of the biggest watched events. But 60 Minutes that follows immediately after on ABC is even bigger. But it's got the audience carryover from watching Monday Night Football, right? And the TV ad spots that they could sell in 60 Minutes were so expensive that you could almost view the Monday Night Football as a lost leader to bring you the TV back for 60
budget,
minutes.
basically.
Right, and what you said earlier, right, which is if you think of the acceleration and things like Sunday Ticket, I imagine, and I'm sure there are analytics inside YouTube where they're sat there going, either we've got to get out of this Sunday Ticket thing, or holy crap, this is great. I imagine the latter, which says people come for Sunday Ticket and then they spend hours on YouTube. And that's where we're making our money. It won't be directly from just the ads we sell around this. It will be because we now have this captive audience. We keep them here for longer. We sell more content, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's for sure. I think as well, on addition to that, I think that the Sunday Ticket is the best marketing investment. That's always going to be loss making. That's definitely 100% not going to make a profit. I totally don't think that was the whole point of making a profit at all. I believe that the reason why they made that investment, which was very smart and very different than any strategy that has been done like in the last 10 years, was actually to switch the 50 years old male that is watching the Sunday Ticket from the TV controller to the mobile, or like just to put YouTube on and say, this is actually easy. And so moving the money from cable to YouTube, and then the user experience is just easier, and then not going back. I think that is the investment to the future, and that is going to be paying out along the years. It's not going to be in 1 year, 2 years, not even in 3 years. But of year 5, that's going to be a payout. And year 6 and 7, etc. Those are the most important targets in terms of audience for TV, basically.
Yeah.
Once you log them in, there's no way back. There's absolutely no way back. It's like going backwards to a black and white TV. It's like if you got the color one, there's absolutely no way unless you like vintage, and that's 1 out of 1,000,000, and that's it.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think it is an investment in the future of YouTube, and That doesn't mean they'll do it across multiple sports or other sports in other geographies. But um, I think there's what's very interesting though about what you said is it flies in the face of what most people talk about, right? So if I dig deeper on that, most people go, you have to obsess about the youth of today. But actually what you've just said is, well, hang on a minute, but we make money from people who are 40 to 60. And how do we get them on our platform and spending time on our platform? Because that's actually the guys with disposable income. Those are the families have the money that we really need to tap into. The teenagers don't want to spend any money, right? Partly because they don't have any, and they're asking their
Or
parents.
they go for micropayments. It's a completely different usage, completely different.
So to me, that it's really interesting because everyone obsesses with, oh, we got to get the youth. I'm like, yeah, no, YouTube has them. Like, it's got them. So where does it grow? Where does it grow? Right. And, I mean, I have a boy who, until very recently, the only social he was allowed was YouTube. And I learned more about YouTube Shorts through my son than I did on anything else. And I'm delighted to say that 90% of what he consumes on YouTube and YouTube Shorts is football. But
that's reassuring.
At the moment, it's reassuring. He's 14, so I'm sure that will start to shift pretty soon. And I won't even know it shifted, right? But again, he knows more about football at his age than I ever did. And my parents will tell you that I knew more about football than they ever did. So in my case study of one, the obsession with football is there, just where he's consuming it. And of course, he'll be on YouTube watching shorts of football whilst watching the game I'm watching on the big screen in front of us. Right. And I find that fascinating. But then I realize that I'm on WhatsApp messaging my buddies about the game. So we're both two screening. We're just doing it in a slightly different way. Right. So again, and then you have to realize that the ads that are being set to me and the ads being set to him, you suddenly realize that, wow, I'm getting really gray haired and old because the ads are so different.
They are fairly different. But yeah, and the funny thing is if you're doing everything on the same account and then you get mixed up kind of ads, which is very odd. It's like, okay, it's not very good targeted. And then you're like, yeah, okay, I get that with my kids and they're slightly younger. So I get all the cartoon, all the things for the kids. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
my son doesn't appreciate it, mainly because I use YouTube primarily as an older man as a how-to video content, as in the gears on my bike are broken. How do I fix it? Right, I need to put the shed up. How do I do it? And I go on YouTube and have someone explain to me like I'm an idiot. And I'm like, okay, got it. Which is not what my son wants popping up in his feed.
Fair enough, but it works. I mean, you fix your bike, and that's all that matters.
And it's nice to occasionally confuse the algorithm. Apparently this kid loves football and shed fix it up videos. Interesting combination, but okay.
Fair enough. And going back to the topic though on sports data and the direction of YouTube, but why do you think that the organizations are not there? Because I mean, I think it's used by organizations, and I know it takes time, and in a way or another, they're all using the YouTube, but in reality, it's not as leveraged. I mean, it's not considered so much for business. It's like you have to have it, you do something with it, but it's not something that could be leveraged for business, which for me is the ultimate goal is either you have something and that's a business meaning or it doesn't. So, and I don't see that so much in sport like it could.
So, I mean, I started my career in sponsorship, right? So I sold cigarettes and alcohol at the back of fast cars. And what I found fascinating as I moved on in life was I realized that when I was in sponsorship, all I obsessed about was sponsorship. And only later did I realize sponsorship was a part of a bigger media complex, right? and that where did that fit with direct mail, direct messaging? Where did that fit with advertising? Where did that fix with SEO, and all these different bits? And it's, to me, sponsorship was the holy grail. And then you realize, well, okay, actually, it's quite a small part of a much bigger piece. And I think then I see the same in other parts of like sports thinks it's super special. And I'm like, well, we are. And I'm obsessed with sports. I'm the very definition of an addict, or a fanatic, if you want. But we're part of media and entertainment, and you have to get your head around that. And then actually, I actually think we're just part of the consumer space, which is why I'm obsessed with the fan, because if we're in the consumer industry, that's what we should be obsessed about.
That's your client.
So if I go to the YouTube piece, I think the problem is that some people are obsessed with social media and how do you distribute on social media. Some people are obsessed with YouTube and the Robloxes and the gaming side of things. And some people are obsessed with broadcast. And my point is, no, it's all a part of a whole, right? So
100%. That's 100% sure.
So you have to, if you are in sport, it makes no sense to me for you not to have a YouTube strategy. I understand why loads of executives are very nervous about people like YouTube and Facebook and so on, because first of all, they all threw everything onto Facebook and the like in order to get likes and engagements, and then realize they'd given away a lot for nothing, and now the fan expects to get those highlights for free. And like, well, now we realize the highlights are the value because people are watching more of the highlights than they are of the live, but we give away the premium for free and we keep. So it's kind of worked. Like the theory was, if we give away the highlights, people will come and watch the main content, and they go, people have gone, no, we've seen the best bits. Why would we watch the whole 90 minutes, whatever, if you're going to give me the best bits for free? So I think if you are an exec, I completely understand the paranoia. I mean, and there is that phrase, only the paranoid survive, which I think is a good phrase. So you have to be sat there going, okay, how do I protect my business? How do I generate a return? And again, the return might not be a direct profit from a YouTube or a Snapchat or whatever it may be. Just as we discussed earlier, YouTube might lose money on Sunday Ticket, but make money from being involved in the NFL, right? So the NFL is sat there going, we're making money directly off YouTube. Hopefully they are also sat there going, and we've now managed to get ourselves in front of another audience that is hopefully partly our current audience, but partly hopefully the future audience as well. So to me, it's a case of, you need to be on social, you need to be on YouTube, you need to be distributing, but you need to be sat there going, what is our model? How do we generate a return? And I think it's important to think about it as generating a return, because that does not necessarily mean financial today.
Yeah, I don't think it's financially today is as strong any platform in general, but you need to think 10 years from now, 5 years from now, like it needs to be part of the overall strategy, like it's a direction. So for example, like it could be something like, if, for example, YouTube is becoming the TV of tomorrow, which it might. I mean, it might not be the only one, of course, but it might. Where is the investment that brings you like a big share of it? And how do you leverage that, like strategically?
Yeah.
That would be the question in my point of view. So then you have a plan to actually get to that strategy. And then whenever that becomes a thing for real, like it's already a thing, and it grows 20% year on year. So it's not really small. But the minute it becomes financially interesting, you're already super well positioned. But you need to have a very long view on it.
You do need to have a long view. And yeah, you definitely need to have a view on it. And your view can't be put your head in the sand and ignore it, because now you're just missing out and there isn't anything there. So I spent a time at FIFA, and I remember trying to come up with what could a FIFA Plus look like. And we're talking 6 years ago. And my point that I made in my strategy document was we don't have any real life content. And when we do, it was subprime content, right? Because you'd already sold the World Cup and all that, and that's fine. And I know in the last World Cup, they obviously had some live stuff going out in Brazil and trying to test that case study. My point was we have some really interesting routes, and we're going to create some of our own content, which is, and I think if you go on places like UEFA and FIFA Plus, there is some cool, beacon content. But if you think of the budgets that they throw at that compared to, I think, what is it? I read something like the big content companies are throwing 126 billion at content in the next year. Like, we're not touching the sides, like just insane money. And we're in content wars, fine. And I was just sat there going, but if you go on to, and I've been on most of them, if you go on to the sports specific channels, most of them I find very dull. And I go on and I'm like, yeah, nothing keeps me here for very long and I'm going to bounce out. And so what I came up with in 2018 was, how do we integrate a YouTube? So if I was creating FIFA Plus, how do I make sure YouTube is a part of FIFA Plus? Like, is it embedded in? What does that mean? What's the model look like? Can I have other social formats, whether that's TikTok or whatever it be as well? Because what I want is the audience to come here and to get sticky. And what are the economics back? And the stickiness, by the way, is not come back to me at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon to watch an under 21 game. And in a month's time, we're going to release a new Messi documentary. That isn't sticky. It's good to have, and some of the stuff is brilliant. But once you've watched it, you're like, eh. Whereas watch a video on YouTube, and the next thing you realize you've been on YouTube for an hour.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm just going to go on Instagram for a minute and like doom scrolling, as we call it, right? Yeah. So I'm sat there going, and it's 6 years ago. So again, if I have a problem, it's maybe I'm ahead of my time sometimes. But to me, if you could have integrated it properly back then, when perhaps FIFA had more power than YouTube in football, I think you could have created a really cool product that both had Halo content and the stickiness that kept people coming back and back and back and spending time there, which ultimately is what drives the revenue.
So still, like, you see a long way for new things coming up for sports rights holders. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think we're for many reasons. We're living in genuinely fascinating times. I think fan consumption is wildly different to it used to be, but no less obsessive. I think we're going to go through media consolidation again. After the great unbundling, always comes the great rebundling.
Of course.
I mean, again, as soon as
how do you make money? It was like, how do you make money in media? You unbundle and rebundle, and then unbundle again. That's the story of media, isn't it?
Yeah, and the great unbundling was meant to release all this value for the consumer, and then we realized that the consumer is having to spend on 8 different subscriptions. Is going, Jesus, I just want to know where it is and watch it. I think so, and I think one of the biggest challenges and it goes back to what we said earlier, which is there's more consumption of sport today than there ever has been. But TV ratings are down, right? And so the headline news is that consumption is down. I think what is going to be interesting to watch in the next couple of cycles is a pivot perhaps back to free to air and define free to air, because if you're nervous that your audience is dying out, how do you regenerate the audience? Again, I've been saying this for a decade, which is if you take the UK as an example, we got rid of physical education in schools. We then sold all the playgrounds off to build apartments. We got rid of a lot of parks, and at the same time, computer gaming was rising, and people getting more TVs and computer game consoles in their bedrooms, and therefore wouldn't need. And you're sat there going, so you wonder why gaming is such a massive industry and why sport is going for a revolutionary moment. Well, it's not just about what we did in football and in cricket and rugby and in sport. It's what we did in the whole of the UK. We completely changed how children were brought up. And then we're sat there going, well, that's a sport problem. No, it's a macro problem. Sport is a reflection of that macro problem. If you wish to reverse it, what can you do about generating more sport at a younger age, physical sport, as well as gaming sport? To me, they're one and the same. You can do both. I love companies like Play Versus, teaching kids how to be competitive in computer gaming. Brilliant. So to me, you have that, and then, okay, we put everything behind a paywall in order for you to watch sport, and it's generated huge profits, lots of revenue. The product has never been so good. How do you still make money if you then have to come away from behind a paywall to bring back the audience? So I think, there is a lot to unpack, even in that 2-minute dialogue, or monologue, should I say, about the state of the industry. So I believe something like a YouTube will end up a winner in this space regardless. I think sports executives and YouTube and Facebook and other executives need to figure out what actually is a better model, where everyone can benefit.
Just adding up one thing, because there's a need of new models, that's for sure, and there's a need of revenue generation. It's not that everything should be for free; it should serve a purpose from a business perspective, one way or another. That's a fact. How I don't see it coming yet. I see from the music industry, it went through cycles, and it went very bad for a long time with digital, and then very, very well as well. It wasn't easy. 100% not easy, but then they figured, because as for sport, there's never been so much request of content and consumption of content. People want music, people want sport. They consume it completely different than before. New generation even more differently, and that's a fact. And as an industry, you need to figure out how to serve the audience and how to make money out of it. But first of all, I think that figure out what the audience wants, and then build the business around it. And in a way, even I see that you're advising as well, like Baller League or like Mercury 13 or Apex Capital, and that's completely, in a way, it's different models that are picking up in younger generations, the ones that, in a way, like traditional sports are not. So like if you look at Baller League or like Kings League, they're actually their numbers are growing. They are a business. They are standalone business, but they start from a completely different point of view. So they start from the audience and they go up building the business in a way.
Yeah. So and it's easier. It's easier in an earlier stage, right? Look, I mean, I love ball.
100%.
I think Felix is doing an amazing job there. But he had no cost base to start with to then figure out what. So if you're going to flip the professional sports model on its head, well, how do we pay everybody? How do I have long argued that we need a different business strategy in sports. I understand why it's complex and difficult, and often why I like advising these companies is to say, I've both seen the good and the bad and the ugly. I have invested in the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I've made good money and I've lost money on different ones. One of the ones I lost the most money on was Rightster, which was the YouTube business I went into. Again, the theory was right, timing and execution were wrong, and I think that again goes into the conversation to be had. I think my nervousness for what I see currently is professional sports trying to implement their current business model into new technologies, or using technology to incrementally improve their current business model. And my point is, you should be viewing technology as an opportunity for something different. Yes, you should be improving your business incrementally regardless, right? And there are ways of doing that. But trying to force an old business model on a new technology makes no sense to me. I mean, women's football, Mercury 13, again, I'm hugely excited by it, the opportunity around it. One of my main things I keep saying is don't do what men did. I went on a podcast where I remember hearing some women say, well, we want to replicate the men's side of football. And I was
No, just
horrified. I
do
was like,
something different. Just, no, no,
well,
please, no.
I just sat there and it was an English group of people and there was a lot of people in the room. I think my comment was there are 94 professional football clubs in the UK and probably about 90 are bankrupt on a technical operating basis. After trading players, more of them are profitable, or at least an
Yeah, but
EBITDA
that's a
profit.
different story.
But I'm saying that on an operational basis, 90% of men's football clubs are bankrupt or insolvent. I'm like, why on earth would you want to replicate that business model? It makes no sense to me. There's
Especially if
no
you're starting
logic
fresh.
behind that.
That's the beauty of it. You can build your own rules. So
Right. And
just
so,
change it.
Baller is doing a completely different thing and it's growing massively. It's really fast. Super excited. They announced recently the UK and then US expansions, and I'm super excited to see it. And I can't wait to take my son to an event in the UK. Having a reason to take him to a Monday night event in Germany, more complicated when he's got school. So really excited for that. Super excited about Mercury 13 and women's football in general. I just think they're really good things. I love that the championship the WSL deal for the championship is that all games will be shown on YouTube. Brilliant. Like exactly how I think. The model may be right, it may be wrong. I love that they're trying it. Absolutely love that they're trying it. And that so many of those games, it's hard to monetize long tail content. It is. This could be a really cool way to start figuring it out and learn from it with YouTube. Like learn from it. It's going to, my hope is that YouTube shares enough data with the WSL and the FA that they can figure out what works, what doesn't.
Oh, well, there's no shortage of data. So I think most of the cases is like the usage of data is more. I mean, you don't have first party data, but fine. I mean, that's the
But
conversation.
that's
If
the
that's the
feature anyway.
conversation, that's a feature. And then it depends on what you do with the first party data. Because I've heard people like, yeah, I don't have first party data. Yes, but the question is, what do you do with it? Well, I have it. Yeah, brilliant.
Well, sports have
Yeah, it's
had that
value.
for a
Yes,
while.
brilliant. But if you don't leverage that and build value out of it, who cares?
So I've been to a few conferences. So for a number of years, you heard lots of people, myself included, saying you need to have a content strategy, you need to have a data strategy. And lots of organizations have built out a content strategy and a data strategy, not necessarily combined, which is interesting. And at the end of it, we didn't move the needle. We just spent more money. I was like, did you start with stealing from Simon Sinek your why? Like, why are you doing that? What actually is your model? And I play football or I play basketball. I'm like, no. So what? Okay, great. And I'm glad you're creating content. I'm glad you got a CRM system. Um, but if there is no reason, if there is no why in what you're trying to get to, as you said, the data is just ones and zeros. It's pointless. It's information because you don't know the question to ask it. Right? Now, at least you've been capturing it, and now hopefully you can bring in some people who go, okay, let's try and make sense of this data, and what does it mean, and what is the consumer telling you in reality, and what do we now need to adjust for? But again, a lot of the data in sports is currently passive data. And what I mean by that is, we're still measured in engagement, which is a Facebook like. I'm like, well, Facebook like is the lowest form of human interaction in my mind. So,
Yeah, that's not that
what actually have you
instrumental.
learned? What can you do with it?
But like even just especially for women football, like because it's starting out, it's really like there's not so much data about it. Just understanding who is the real target. the target audience, just the demographic and who they are, it's already super valuable, because then sponsorship should leverage that. Then,
Yeah.
like any activity, like in terms of touring or like whatever they're doing, and it's you don't know until you know it. And
Yeah.
like I agree, like going live and creating the audience and gathering those data is like brilliant, because there's
Uh,
no way you're going to build the audience until you actually try hard. You can't put it under the paywall. Just it's not going to work out, because first
no,
you need the audience,
you,
and
you
then
right.
you get value out of it.
But I loved your point on, who is the audience. So there was a great company. I really liked it. I never pulled the trigger on investing, which worked out in the end. I'm trying to remember. I think it's a guy called Jeffrey Lynn out of New York, and he ran a company which did, like a subscription box of sports paraphernalia. So as a Chelsea fan, I would get quarterly or monthly or whatever and I really liked it conceptually. And I remember meeting them when they were wrapping it up and going, yeah, it didn't work. We pivoted too late. I said, well, what was the pivot? And said, well, we always thought that the audience was male. And we discovered the audience wasn't male, it was female. And it was like,
Boom.
for men's football shirts. And they're like, right, but they don't buy it. Their wife, their mother, their girlfriend buys it.
That's the
The mother
perfect.
of the child, my wife is the one who buys the Christmas presents. So my son will get stuff that has Chelsea on it this year. I'm not the one who buys it. It's my wife. And it's only near the end when they went, well, yeah, for some reason this just isn't taking off. Where the churn rate is through the roof. And they pivoted to marketing towards that audience, actually the 35 to 55-year-old females whose husbands, boyfriends, children might be interested in sport. They suddenly saw their revenue and their orders spike. It was too late. They ran out of money. And like, God damn it. And you're like, yeah, right. Sometimes your audience isn't actually what you think it is.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of times, way more than you think. And especially, and then if it's a sport, this that could happen for a brand. But then if you're a sport that is building up the audience, 99% of the time you have an hypothesis. You should have an hypothesis. 99% of the time that's not correct, or at least it's not fully correct. And you
But that's
might
the
get
point of the
something,
hypothesis.
but that's it.
But
Say it again.
but that's the point of a hypothesis. So this is what I think people forget about science, right? And we can learn from science all the time, which is you ask a hypothesis and then you try to prove or disprove it, right? So my hypothesis used to be OTT was the right way to go for sports. I'm now at the point where I think we've tested that hypothesis, and I think I was partly right, but mostly wrong, at least in the way in which we've done it so far. But the point of the hypothesis is to make the learning and to adjust,
And that, of
right?
course, and
It's
read
not
the
to sit
data
there and
and
go,
then
no, no.
adjust.
Right. At the moment, sometimes it feels like we have an hypothesis, we disprove it and go, no, we're going to. So I always love this one. As I said, my father worked in tobacco for 33 years. I worked in it for 4 or 5. And what was funny was everyone is a believer that passive smoking kills. And yet, when that EPA data came out and said it did, and it was front page of every newspaper, they were taken to court. And the judge threw out the research because it became very clear that the people who'd run the research had a hypothesis. The data set that they got did not meet the hypothesis, which proved that passive smoking did not kill. So they moved the goalposts. And you're like, that goes against every scientific thing. So, but
Yeah.
by this point, everyone believed that passive smoking killed. And I think sometimes in sport, we're in the same cycle where we go, no. My business model works. And even though the data is telling me it doesn't, we're going to move it so it fits my
So that it
box
works.
on it in. And you're like, no, guys, okay. And look, it's very easy.
But now there is enough data to actually really have some fun with it, to be honest. I mean, I'm a data geek, so of course not everybody loves those data, but you can really try out many different things. And it's more of a tech
And I would say,
approach.
and Pala, I'd say some of the data proves just how good the sports business model has been. But that's why it's so difficult to change it. It's been an enormous, like if you think of the growth of sport in the last 30 years, it's an amazing success story as an industry. It really is. And I can bash it all day long as best I want, but it's enormously successful. If you think of the wages that people can now earn playing sport, it's absolutely insane. The numbers are just off the charts. That doesn't happen if the industry isn't enormously successful. Of course, when you have success, it's very hard to change. It's very hard to change. The stories that we have of, was it the top 100 come for the Fortune 100? How many still survive? They were all so successful. It was very hard for them to change their business model, right? So to me, I think the Premier League is the best football league in the world. But I'm also not foolish enough to think it will always be the best league in the world, because others have to adjust and adapt, and they don't have the same thing holding them to the current business model. Others will argue, well, they have so much money that they can adapt and they can afford to. It's like, yeah, it's really hard to change from something that's so successful. So,
but as an organization in general, and I can't disagree with you. Like, of course, like it was super successful in the last 50 years, and to be continuing being successful, like as a number one, you always need to innovate, whatever it is, and
I
because
agree.
otherwise you're not. Like if you stand still as an industry, and this applies to sport but other industries, it's not that you need to be on YouTube to succeed. That's absolutely not my point. It's not. That's just like an excuse to the conversation in a way, and there might be something important there, but it's like the usage is changing, and if you want to succeed, you need to learn that and leverage that towards your success, I think,
Yeah,
in the overall strategy in the long term. And that's a business question. It's really not a social media platform question. It's like
100%.
where do you succeed tomorrow and the day after, so you have the next 50 years of success. I think everybody wants that for the sport industry and any other industry, because there is the need, there is the usage. Every kind of generation still leverage a lot of content and uses a lot of content in completely different ways. There is adoption of many different tools and way devices to watch content together, alone, in different ways. The whole globe is connected, so it's a way bigger scale than it was 50 years ago or even 30 years ago. So now the question is, how do you succeed today? And I think that's what today and tomorrow and the next 50 years. And I think that's the big question that is going to be interesting to see how it's going to be evolving. But it is a big opportunity. It's a massive one.
It's a massive one for those that get it right.
Fair enough. Fair
Well,
enough.
I mean, look, you can recycle all. I mean, I've sat in a meeting. I can't say where, but I've sat in a meeting where I've sent a WhatsApp to a colleague across the room and gone, "Do you think this is what it was like to be in the Kodak boardroom when they decided not to go digital?" I mean, I've literally sent that WhatsApp to somebody during a meeting, going, because the people in the room were telling me, "Oh, well, our house isn't burning." I'm like, no, but look at the forest around it, right? Like the hints are there. There's loads of smoke. We should be thinking about it. So, but I think I go back to my point, which is I think it's important to recognize that sport has come an awful long way. It has changed a lot. It is enormously successful. And yet 100% agree with, but if you don't innovate, you're in trouble. So how do you innovate? Where do you need to be? I would slightly counter what you said, which is I think if you're in the content industry and you don't have a YouTube strategy, you're in real trouble. By the way, your current YouTube strategy should be we don't distribute to YouTube. That's a decision to make.
Yeah, well,
Right?
it's a decision.
Right. My problem is more people who stick their head in the sand and go, "I don't know what to do with YouTube." It's like, well, make it. You've got to you've got to try and learn it, understand it, and make a decision on what your strategy needs to be in that context. Preferably, I would agree with you. Find somebody who really understands YouTube. Find somebody who has probably done something similar, like you suggested earlier, the music industry, and say, who's gone through this kind of transformation from effectively analog to digital. Like, how do we do this? What are the pitfalls? Okay, it's not going to be direct correlation, but at least it's a similar space.
That's appropriate.
What can we learn? And be ready to change the hypothesis if you're proven wrong, and test
Which
again.
most probably is the case. As we said, like if you need to innovate, most probably your hypothesis is not going to be correct. But once it's proved, move on and or
Yeah.
double down if it's correct. Now, very last question, and then we close. What are you most proud of in this last 10, 15 years of innovation, tech, sports?
What am I most proud of? There's two. Um, the first one was when and both of them go back to working with my dad, who I desperately wanted to work with. And I had to learn that between 9 and 5, I had to call him Martin, and before and after, I referred to him as Dad, so we knew what kind of conversation we were having. But in 2009, I pitched him that we should start investment partners, and that sport was an asset class, and we should do this. Again, you can say the timing was wrong. We didn't raise a fund. We did everything deal by deal. Over a good bottle of red wine, you can hear all the stories of the companies we looked at, made offers on, but because we weren't a fund, we didn't close on, which if we'd done them all, and we wouldn't have done them all, but if we'd done them all, I'd have retired by now. And I think we proved, it was my father, it was me, Matthew Wheeler, who's now A&W Capital, Nick Couchman, and John Connolly. It was the five of us. I think we proved that investing in sports assets is viable and works, and you can make money. The downside of that is other people have perhaps made more money than we did. So sometimes being the first mover isn't the best thing, and maybe being a fast follower is. And the other one was, honestly, I was sat at this very same desk in 2022 with my dad on the Friday of the Cheltenham Gold Cup, which my dad never misses. And it must have been about 10 o'clock at night, and we hit send on a fully funded offer to buy Chelsea Football Club, which is the club he grew up supporting, I grew up supporting, my son has grown up supporting. And whilst we didn't win the bid, and it was a by the fan, for the fan bid that I pitched him to come back out of retirement and say, no, we should do this. We didn't win. I've never seen my wife and mother and sister so happy to see me lose at something. But the hug that my dad and I shared that night when we hit send, phenomenal stuff. Like, just the concept was crazy. To actually deliver it, and again, we couldn't have done it. I mean, the hours my mum and my wife had to put up with, the two of us nonstop, at late night phone calls to the US and all this stuff, like, you can't do it without the right support. So that's it. Those are two things.
Right. That's very interesting, because it's very much of a fan / professional / executive all together in one. So it's both emotional and business, and that's a very sport thing. It's really like, you can't uncombine the two things, like emotions and work in a way. And so that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here in this episode of the podcast. I really appreciate the chat. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and let's see if in a year time anything changed. Maybe we're gonna have another episode and see if the algorithm still is showing you all the same people. It's always me and Joe as well. Like, I think that you should unfollow us and see if that works. Like, as an hypothesis, if it's our problem, I'm gonna have Joe in an episode and say we need to stop.
No, and one thing we can guarantee is in a year things will have moved again.
I'm curious to see what's going to be December 2025. Let's have another episode. Thank you very much, Michael.